In this chapter, we'll be discussing communication. This is in your Essentials book on pages 162 through 197. Communication is essentially the way that we express our thoughts or our ideas. It may be a way that we share information or communicate our experiences. And there are various ways that we may do that. We may speak, we may write those ideas, we may use nonverbal cues like facial expressions or body language. So it's not all verbal communication, but there are various ways that we may share what we're thinking. Children, of course, learn to speak and build larger vocabularies through the experiences and interactions that they have with adults who have a greater vocabulary and older children that they are involved with who are also more skilled communicators. As an early childhood educator, you play a vital role in helping build these children's communication skills, not only through your interactions with them, but through the environment that you provide that allows them opportunity and materials to use to explore language and literacy skills and the ability to communicate. In this chapter, some of the topics we'll be talking about are how can you create an environment that's going to support children's early language and literacy skills? How can you support their oral language development, their actual communication ability verbally? What can you do to help support those dual language learners, the children who have more than one home language? What can we do to foster reading development and writing development? And how can we help our families to learn what they can do to help their children develop these skills? All research is telling us currently that children who begin kindergarten with a strong foundation in early literacy skills are much more likely to be successful students in their latter years of school. So over the next several pages in your reading, I think we denoted it as 162 to 172, we're going to talk about all the things that we can do in our environment to help the children have more opportunity to become really strong in their language and literacy skills at an early age. So one of the things that's really important for you to do is to label your classroom. The written language becomes more meaningful to children if they see print displayed throughout their environment. And so when we say labeling materials, it doesn't mean that you have to label everything, which would be very overwhelming for the children and for you, but to label some things in the classroom, not only with words, but also with pictures. And so it depends on what it is, which you would label with a word and which you would label with a word and a picture. The general rule of thumb that I use, if it's a non-movable object or something that's large and you're not going to move frequently, like a table or the clock, those would be labeled with just a word. But toys on the shelves, things that the children are going to move and then need to put back, you would label with the word and the picture. And that just helps the children to be able, by looking at the picture, to know that that's where that belongs. And then they start to associate the word that's written there with the item that has the picture displayed. And so they begin to learn that print really has a purpose, that that word means whatever that is on the shelf. Some other ways that you can involve print in the classroom are talked about on pages 163 and 164, and it breaks it into various age groups. For the young and mobile infants, some things that you can do is writing information in front of infants so that they can see you actually writing. You can use age-appropriate books throughout the classroom. You want those books where the children can easily access them. It's more about the books being where the children can find them. You can label things with the child's name and photograph. You want print to be down at their eye level. Lots of colorful pictures of familiar objects and people. And you can label those pictures with the names of the people or the name of the object. And it doesn't necessarily have to be things that are in the classroom. It might be a picture of a dog and the word dog, just on the wall down low where the babies can see that. For your toddlers, you're going to want to provide lots of materials and toys that encourage children to communicate and pretend play, which will build their verbal communication skills. You're going to want to have props and activities that will support fine motor development that they're going to need later for writing. You can add books and writing materials all throughout the learning centers. Your books do not need to be isolated to just the library area. The toddlers do need lots of opportunities with writing materials, and so you're going to want to provide those also. You can create new signs in your setting. For example, on the door, a sign that says, "Gone for a walk, be back soon," or "On the playground, be back in a little while," that you would hang those on the door when you leave the classroom. Lots of real-world reading materials, even for these toddlers. Magazines, cookbooks, catalogs, things that they would see maybe in their homes would be good for them. For your preschoolers, of course, you're going to get a little more extensive. There's ways that you can provide the children's names throughout the environment with their photo, not just on their cubbies, but maybe on language charts. Books, of course, in the library area. And again, books don't have to be limited to the library area. Pictures of the children's families labeled with the names or the relationships of the people in the pictures. Make sure that around the classroom you hang samples of the children's writing, not only yours. When the children do artwork, ask if you can write their words on their paper and have them dictate to you what their artwork is about and write that. You can do language charts, which I spoke about a few minutes ago, where you ask a question and the question's written at the top of the chart, and then you have every child's name and you write their exact response, and those could be posted around the classroom. You could do recipe charts, recipe cards when you're doing a cooking activity. Not only does that help the children to follow the steps of the recipe, but it's exposing them to the written word. Alphabet strips or word walls. Alphabet strips are great where you have the alphabet printed out. Word walls actually have each letter of the alphabet and a space where you can put the new words that begin with that letter underneath of there. And so you would have an A displayed, and then underneath the A you would have the word apple. You might have a child's name in the room who is Amanda, and so every new word that you introduced that began with that letter, you would actually have that word printed there. It's important for you to have charts displayed, like daily schedules that include words and pictures, or an attendance chart with the children's name, maybe a helpers chart with specific jobs that you need helpers for, and then the children's names are there as they pick the job that they're going to do for that day. So those are just some of the ideas for your preschoolers. Now, you also have dual language learners, and those are your children who may have more than one home language. It's important that we support that within the classroom, and one of the ways that we can do that is by labeling items in both of their home languages. So if they speak English and Spanish, having materials labeled in both. Now, it is important for you to color code that. So if you have English and Spanish, maybe all your English words would be in blue and all your Spanish words would be in red, so that the children can learn to separate those. You might have all of their languages represented in your labels and their signage, and then include appropriate pictures that are clear or photographs with the written labels so that they can clearly determine what that word is. Most children won't learn to read independently until kindergarten and even into first grade. But the early years before that are really critical in ensuring their success for future reading. And so it's really important that we, as the early childhood caregivers, provide books that are age appropriate and developmentally appropriate for the children that we're working with. And so, what we're going to talk a little bit about now is how do we choose books that are appropriate for our young and our mobile infants, for our toddlers, and for our preschoolers. In your textbook on page 165, it talks about selecting books for children. And so we're going to start with your young and mobile infants. Obviously, one of the first things you would think about is the durability of the book. They don't yet know how to handle the book with care, and they're going to mouth it because that's typical for that age group. And so we want to choose books that are made out of a durable material like cloth or the durable board books, even vinyl books. You see those sometimes in bathtub toy aisle. But you want to choose books that are about familiar things like families and animals and everyday experiences. Children this age do like songs and chants and rhymes, and so that might be the type of storyline. It could be just 1 or 2 words per page, which is very appropriate for this age also. As far as the pictures or the illustrations in the book, it's best if those are simple and bright to be eye-catching. Around 1 or 2 pictures or illustrations per page. And then about things they know about, like their daily routine, bathing or bedtime or eating. For your toddlers, of course, you want to make sure that you're adding more content to the book so there can be more words to increase the children's vocabulary. Still, you want to think about durability, especially your younger toddlers. So you're still going to use board books and hardback books. You could introduce paper books as they get older into their toddlerhood. You want to choose books that are about familiar subjects still. Things about families, things about other toddlers, experiences that they have on a daily basis, familiar animals. Feelings are a really good topic for this age group, especially when you can have a book that has photographs of various facial expressions. You can choose books about simple concepts, things like size and shape and color, self-help skills, and interests that the children may be having right then. Now, for your preschoolers, you want to think about books that are going to be language rich. So you're adding much more of a storyline, easy to follow plots for these children, and characters that are interesting and compelling and likable. You want the illustrations to be pleasing to the eye, things that will draw the children in, still bright and colorful. You want to make sure that the books represent the languages of all the children in your classroom. And throughout the year, you're going to add and rotate books in and out of your learning centers and your library area. And those books will be rotated in and out based maybe about whatever your topic is or the interest of the children changing, experiences that children in the classroom are having. Anything that a child is dealing with, you could find a book to help them relate to their situation. And so it's really important that you provide a variety for these preschoolers. Make sure to review the charts on page 167 in your Essentials book. They're really good for helping you understand how to evaluate books and their appropriateness for preschoolers, and then how to categorize your books into what topics or what types of books that they are. So in your textbook on pages 168 through 172, the discussion is about how to set up a literacy center in your preschool classroom. And so within that literacy center, we talk about the book area, the writing area, the listening area, the technology area, and then a publishing area. And so these areas would not necessarily be all one large center, although they could be. But it may be several small centers that are near one another. And it's good for them to be near one another because they're all quiet areas, and we know that the quiet areas should be closer to one another and away from those noisier areas. And so let's think about your actual book area. You may call it the library. What should be there and how should it be set up? Obviously books, and books that are appropriate and appealing to the children. But they need to be stored in a fashion that is organized and appealing. And so the small shelves that allow the books to be forward-facing is most likely to draw the children in, and the books being organized on that shelf also. You want a cozy area, so if it's not carpeted, then you would need a little rug there. You would need some pillows, some soft chairs possibly. You could display pictures around the walls in that area. Maybe a small rocking chair. You may even have a small table and chair. You could have some sort of little reading nook, maybe a tent or a decorated box that they could get in to read. You want maybe some stuffed animals, even a doll that they could read to, because a lot of times they really like to imitate us reading to them, and so they need something to read to. It's good to have story props, so maybe puppets or flannel board stories, maybe puppets on sticks or story pieces where they can retell the story, things to make the books come alive. In your writing area, you're obviously going to need a table and chairs, and you're going to need materials that will help the children practice their writing skills and learning the alphabet and those types of things. So you need a variety of writing tools, pencils, markers, crayons, chalk, and writing surfaces, paper, chalkboards, dry erase boards, which seem to be an absolute fascination for your preschool children. Journals or portfolios or blank books the children can write in, create their own story, document their thoughts. Blank labels, envelopes, and a mailbox. They love to send each other mail, and so that is a really popular thing to do there. Rulers, pencil, erasers. You might want staplers or hole punches if they are ready for those materials. You can use little lap pads or clipboards. They love clipboards, especially because they like to go around and write down other people's words or take other people's orders. Alphabet strips or samples of the alphabet. You might have letter stamps or index cards. You can always put in there greeting cards that have been used, and the children can reuse those. Um, Anything that you might use to write on, or um, to write with at home, you could use in this area. Now, your listening area obviously needs to include a comfortable space for them to sit with the equipment. They're going to need the tape recorder or CD player, MP3 player. They're going to need headphones, possibly a microphone, um, and then books on tape or audio recordings of music. And if you have the books on tape, you might have props that go along with those there. Now, your technology area is obviously going to include either a computer. Many people have gone to using an iPad or some other form of tablet. Um, if you have access to it, a printer and paper so that they can print off things that they are doing on the computer. If you could have enough room for at least two children, that would be really beneficial. They can interact with each other, or if you have two computers, then you've got two children working. You want to make sure that you evaluate any software or apps that the children might be using to ensure that they are appropriate, and then make sure that it's engaging and interesting, and that the children can navigate it generally on their own with little assistance. Um, you want to make sure that they can experience success with this program, whatever it is that's there for them to use. And then make sure that it can be adapted if you have any children who have special needs or maybe dual language learners. And then as far as the publishing area, this is just where children could make their own books by using that computer or that tablet, um, or writing on paper. And so this could be completely integrated into your writing area and into the technology area, and not necessarily a separate space of their own, but it could be a place of their own. Where maybe they've gone ahead and printed the material, or they've written on the paper, and now they come to this little space, and they can make sure that they can put their book together. And so you might include things there like cardboard or poster board. Maybe you might have a laminator in the classroom that you can help them use to laminate their book. Staplers or yarn, ribbon for binding the book. And then a place where you could display their finished books for their peers to look at. Now, on page 172 is a chart for creating literacy-rich learning centers. So it lists all of the learning centers in the classroom, other than those literacy areas, and what you can do in each of those areas to ensure that it is also a literacy-rich place for the children to play. In order for children to learn to speak, they need human interaction. They need someone to be speaking to them and communicating with them. And so you obviously can help children develop those strong language skills, and ensuring their future reading and writing success by practicing and communicating with them frequently. On pages 173 to 182 in your textbook, it's going to talk about all the ways that you can, through your interactions, encourage a strong oral development in the children that you work with. Before infants can communicate with words or even understand what's being said to them, they communicate their feelings through gestures such as facial expressions and body movement, or crying. And so they are communicating with us, just not verbally from the beginning. Over time, those children will learn to understand other people's speech and language, and they'll begin to respond to that. That's what's known as receptive language. As they grow and gain more ability, they'll learn to um, express themselves through their own words, and that's called expressive language. Now, between the ages of 18 and 24 months, there's this little explosion where children will learn hundreds of words and they'll start to put together two or three words to form short sentences such as all gone or go bye bye, um, all done. And so during that time, we'll start to see that they are really taking in and putting to use all that language that they've heard up till that point. All research is indicating that there's a consistent and strong relationship between the amount of time that a child communicates with an adult and the extent to those communications and conversations and children's later literacy skills. So it is really important that we are having lots of good in-depth conversation with these young children to help build those later skills. An important fact to remember, as with every other area of development, communication is the same. All children will develop at their own pace, and so some children will begin communicating at an early age, and some children, it may take longer for them. They may be focused on other areas of development, and this may not be a priority to them. But the more experience and exposure that we give them with conversation and communication, the more we are encouraging their development in those areas. Remember, when you're talking with children, it's just as if you're talking to another adult, and that there needs to be a balance of input. It doesn't need to be all adult directed. You want there to be that turn taking in conversation, which is that two-way conversation. You should be an attentive listener, and what I find often is that we are really good talkers at children, but we're not really good talkers with children. Um, we we do most of the talking, and we don't give opportunity for them to talk and us to listen. We want to make sure that our talk stays on topic and of interest to the children, and when they are finished talking or they are done with the conversation, then we should be finished, and that the vocabulary um, that we use is introduced in an intentional way, or specifically introducing new words and new vocabulary through our conversation. Pages 174 through 177 talk about using everyday experiences to strengthen children's language. And so some of the things that you can think about with your young infants, you're talking to them throughout daily routines. So while you're diapering, while you're feeding, while you're playing, those are your opportunities to have one-on-one conversations with those individual children, explaining to them what you're doing, talking in a calm, gentle tone. Um, and so it's kind of like you're giving them a play-by-play. I also call it surrounding them in a language envelope. They're just completely encompassed in the language from beginning to end of that day. You want to respond to the babies as if they're talking. I've had students say before that they can't communicate back. They're not going to communicate back if you're not teaching them how. And so you have to model for them. So you have that conversation. You say something and you wait for a response. And it may only be a facial gesture, but you wait and then you coo back and you smile back at them. And then making sure that when they are falling asleep, if it's a child who you hold and rock to get them to sleep, that maybe you sing or talk real calmly to them as you're helping them to rest. Now, for your mobile infants, you're going to do a lot of modeling language. So maybe the child is crying and upset, and you know that it's because they're hungry. You may say, Sam, I can see that you're really upset right now. You're getting hungry. I'm getting your food ready, and I'm going to feed you in just a few minutes. Um, so that you can start helping them to learn to put words to their thoughts. Respond to them when they attempt to communicate. Because by this age, most children are attempting to make those verbal communications. And so respond and model that conversation. When you're talking with these children, you need to use appropriate um, language. And so you don't want to give items or objects um, cute names. They need to be called what they are. For instance, instead of calling a drink of water Wawa, which we see people do in their home, you want to say, "Oh, I see. You want a drink of water." You want to show or point to the material or the object that you're naming so that they can start to relate that name with that object. Talk about things going on in the classroom. Talk about what they're doing. Talk about experiences they may have at home. And for your toddlers, obviously they're beginning to really use language, and so you want to start scaffolding that learning and provide assistance as they are progressing. You want to elaborate on their speech. So um, if they say something incorrectly, rather than correcting them, you're just going to elaborate. So if they say, I have 2 feet, which is a common thing, um, that plural um, mistake is very common. You don't want to say, no, you don't have 2 feet, you have 2 feet. You want to say, oh, I see, you do have 2 feet. Um, you still can show and point to materials that you're referring to when you're talking, but you want to have everyday conversations with those children throughout each day, describing and explaining their actions, the actions of others, describing their play, naming feelings, reading interesting books that have new vocabulary in it. You want to give them an opportunity to share their ideas and their thoughts. If you're singing songs that you can put the children's names into, personalize those songs. Reciting rhymes or chants or little poems that the children are becoming familiar with, and they may be able to repeat those on their own. Using lots of repetitive words is good for this age group. And so those are just some of the things that you can do to enhance their vocabulary. When you think about enhancing your preschool conversations, what's really important here, because usually by this age they're forming more complex sentences. Now it's about modeling the conversation, and so it's important for us as we join or begin a conversation that we model for them how to wait for a response from the other persons in the conversation. That we model the idea of not interrupting, waiting for our turn to speak again, and then when we do speak again, adding information related to what the conversation topic was about. And in order to keep the conversation going, we should model how to say something new and interesting about the topic, or how to ask a question that will promote more involvement in the conversation. And then when we're finished with the conversation, how to let the other person know that we're finished with that conversation rather than just ending it abruptly. It's really important that we help children learn how to apply kind of the rules of communicating in a conversation. And one of the ways that we can do that is by listening to them attentively. and really being plugged into that conversation as a model for them how to appropriately um, partake in a conversation with another person. So, one of the things that's really important for us to do is to scaffold the children's learning. This is discussed on pages 178 and 179. What scaffolding means is to basically support a child's learning by starting and building upon their current knowledge. And so we can provide new challenges or kind of use steps to um, support that further learning. Some ways that we can scaffold children's language development. We can ask open-ended questions. Now, these questions are questions that don't have a right or wrong answer, but they require an answer that is more than just one or two words. And so it prompts thought and a higher vocabulary. Talking with children during play is essential in building vocabulary skills. That's a great part of the day where you can move around the room and you can talk to each individual child. Really interesting during that time is when you can take advantage of dramatic play scenarios, which allows you to have some really fun conversation with the children. Making the most of reading time, whether it's reading to whole group, to small groups, or to individual children. There's lots of time during reading where not only are you building vocabulary, but you can ask questions about the story or the content. You can really help to build that ability to have a conversation. You can let the children retell stories, or you can retell stories. But when the children get to retell those stories or they hear the same story repeatedly, it builds a strong communication and language base. And then one of the greatest times of the day for you to scaffold children's language and to really build communication skills is during mealtime. There's a huge connection in research findings that say that children who have conversation during mealtime during the preschool years will be much more successful in literacy measures later in their school career. This is a time when you can really sit down and have genuine conversations with the children, reflecting on what's already happened during the day, reflecting what they did the night before at home, talking about what you're going to do that afternoon or what exciting experiences and activities are coming later in the week, things that just may be on their mind. But this is a great social and communication time of the day. We've used the word vocabulary several times already, and what vocabulary refers to is just the bank of words that we know and that we use to communicate. And so it's divided into four different types. We have the listening vocabulary, which is the words that we understand when we hear them. The speaking vocabulary, which are the words that we use to speak with. The reading vocabulary, which are the words that we understand when we read them. And then the writing vocabulary, which are the words that we might use when we write. And so for children, the first really to develop are their listening and speaking vocabularies. Just as generally learning to listen and speak happens before learning to read and write. And so they're developing their listening and speaking vocabularies prior to their reading and writing vocabularies. And so vocabulary, though, is most closely linked to reading comprehension. And so the larger or more varied children's listening and speaking vocabularies are, the more likely they are going to become really developed readers. And so it's really important that in those first years when they are building those listening and speaking vocabularies, that they are hearing and learning to use many, many, many words and putting lots of words into that vocabulary bank. On pages um, 180 and 181 within your reading, there's some really interesting statistics from researches that have been done, just talking about the vocabulary and the reading and writing success of children, and how certain factors affect that vocabulary and reading and writing success. So, the last topic in supporting children's oral language development is developing phonological awareness. This just is the ability to notice and manipulate sounds within words. It also is success in reading and writing later in their academic career. And so, instruction in phonological awareness is critical to a child's success to learn to read and write. But we should begin working with young children in what the book lists as 4 different areas. And so the 4 that they're giving to us are rhyming, alliteration, sentence segmenting, and syllable segmenting. And so, of course, we know that rhyming is words that end in the same sound. And alliteration is words that begin with the same sound, such as the example in the textbook is braid, brain, and breakfast. Sentence segmenting, which is hearing each separate word within a sentence. And then syllable segmenting, which is being aware of chunks in words and understanding that words have a beginning, middle, and ending sound. And so it's really important that we do this in a developmentally appropriate manner. And so some ideas that we can use to help these 4 skills happen is to sing and act out rhyming songs or chants and finger plays, have children clapping out syllables to words, experimenting with rhymes, making up silly songs and substituting our own rhyming words for the actual lyrics of the song, reading aloud rhyming books and books that play with language. Dr. Seuss books are great for this. And then having children act out favorite rhyming songs or chants, focusing children's attention on rhymes during daily activity. So you could use as a transition. If your name rhymes with the word plane, you may go get in line now. And so that might be Jane. And so it's not necessarily a sit down at the table, some sort of pencil and paper time for learning, but it's how can you incorporate that into fun daily activities and routines. When you have dual language learners within your classroom, it's should be your goal to support their ability to speak, read, and write English while maintaining and supporting the learning of their home language. In early years, it was believed that exposing a child to more than one language would be confusing and would hinder them to master English. But what we know now is that actually the opposite is true. Teaching a child in their home language will help promote their second language. And so it's really important that we make sure that we understand that their home language is their foundation for cognitive growth, and that children feel very valued when their home language is supported and respected. And so within our work with these children, we need to foster their ability to use both languages and to feel confident with both languages. In your textbook on 184 and 185, there are many simple ideas listed of ways that you can really support and encourage the use of a child's home language while helping them to acquire English. So, what we know is that there is definitive evidence that tells us that reading aloud to young children is the overall best predictor of latter reading success. So it is imperative that we are spending quality time reading aloud to children in our classrooms. It can be reading aloud individually, it can be reading aloud in small group or in large group, but we should be reading aloud to the children on a daily basis. So earlier within this PowerPoint, we talked about how to choose books for young infants, mobile infants, toddlers, and preschoolers. So now we're going to talk about reading to those age groups. So with all of the age groups, let me say again that we should be reading on a daily basis. With our young infants, we want to use really clear speech. Maybe we want to offer them something to hold or to chew on to while we read to them. Reading books with one or two pages in the story, books that have songs and chants like we talked about earlier, and things that follow their interests. And when you hold these infants to read to them, if they are not yet able to sit up, you want to hold them where they can see the book, and you want to cuddle with them. If they're able to sit up on their own, then you want to sit with them, and maybe they're going to sit in your lap. But you want to use excitement in your voice, and you want to allow them to touch the book and point to the pictures. With your mobile infants, you want to make sure that you are encouraging them to choose the books they want to read and encourage them to participate in the story. They should be able to touch the book also, and make sure that your voice is exciting and following the character line of the story. Allow them to read to you and listen to them. Follow their lead. If they lose interest, let them move on to something else. A lot of times I'll see the baby will turn the page 4 pages back, and the teacher will say, no, we need to read this page. We skipped this page. But at this age, really what it is about is getting them to enjoy the process, getting them to enjoy sitting with you and reading with you and looking at the book. And so we want to make it a pleasant experience. With your toddlers, again, you can read to the children individually or in small groups of 2 and 3. You may go with a larger group if they're interested. But if they lose interest, then move on to another activity. You want to let them interact and ask questions, and you want to stop during the story and ask questions to help build their language through conversation. Make sure that you're asking some open-ended questions. You want to be familiar with the book before you read it to the children. Again, using voice inflection and following the drama in the story with your voice. When you're getting ready to read the book, show them the cover. Tell them who the author is and what the author does, and who the illustrator is and what the illustrator does. When you're reading, move your finger under the words as you read. Stop frequently so that you can repeat interesting words or phrases, to ask your questions. Let the children participate in the story. If you have a prop, let them use a prop for the story. It's really important that we're still letting this be an enjoyable time so that they will like the reading. They will like the books. They will like the process of those story times. And then with your preschoolers, again, you may read in whole group. You may read individually or small groups. Still wanting to read every day. You may introduce them to larger vocabulary words within their stories, and start to really help them notice and acknowledge the phonological awareness. You want to have a regular time for reading aloud to the group in a comfortable place. If you're reading alone, you can invite the children to still sit on your lap or still sit beside of you for one-on-one time. You still want to ask lots of questions and let them ask questions during the story and interact with you. You still want to use voice inflection, and you want to comment on the pictures. Um, in the beginning, you still want to tell who the author and illustrator is and talk about what they do. Um, you want to make sure that you contrast your voice according to the storyline. So it may get higher or lower or slower or quicker. Um, Hold the book to the side so that all of the children can see the illustrations while you're reading. So you're not going to hold the book facing you. You're going to turn the book around and let it face them, and you're going to look to the side of it. But read slowly so that they can absorb the words and see the pictures, and make sure that everybody gets, an opportunity to see that page. Um, Stop throughout your reading and ask questions, which we've talked about. And then watch the children's body language or their actions, because that's an indicator as to whether or not they're really interested in this book, or is it time to move on and end the session early. Shared reading is now an activity that's often recommended as a really important thing that adults can do to promote emergent literacy skills. And so this transfers the responsibility of reading from the adult to the children. And to spark shared reading, you can select a big book or a large texted book to share with a group of children. You may want to use predictable books in particular, just because that really encourages the participation of the children, because they feel like they know what's going to happen next. And then as you read, you can point out words, and the children can learn the concept of the words in the print. And that print moves from left to right while reading, and so forth. And this is a really important activity for us to implement into the classroom. Now, as children become more aware of and familiar with the story, they will start to read the story or the text from memory. And so that helps them to feel confident and helps build their ability to feel like they can, and that they do know how to do this reading thing. Some ways that you can encourage alphabet knowledge within the children. Reading alphabet books aloud to the children and pointing out the letters as you read, like Chicka Chicka Boom Boom, great alphabet book. Singing songs that have letter plays, such as the song B-I-N-G-O, Bingo. Alphabet-related games like Alphabet Lotto or Concentration or Alphabet Memory Match Game. Displaying alphabet strips at the children's eye level. And earlier I talked about a word wall with the alphabet and then putting those words under there. Having alphabet props within the learning centers, whether it be letter stamps or alphabet sponges or alphabet puzzles, alphabet blocks. When you're reading or when you're just working with children in the classroom, pointing out alphabet letters that are in labels or on signs, giving them lots of opportunities to practice or develop their writing skills, like making a sign or writing a book or a writing sample, and then teaching children to read and write their own name, because once they know the letters in their own name, other letters may become more interesting and familiar to them. For example, if a child's name starts with the letter C and they've recognized and now know that that is the letter C and that's the first letter in their name, then when they see the word cat or car, they may realize that C begins with the same letter as their name. So that's a really important concept and relation for them. So those are just some developmentally appropriate things you can do to help teach the children their alphabet. As the text says, Reading and writing skills will be developed simultaneously. Um, Vocabulary development and phonological awareness, and hearing books and reading being read aloud help develop their writing skills, not just their vocabulary or reading skills. But before children are fully able to write, they will experiment with writing. So in the next slide, we'll talk about what the stages of a writing are and how do we support their writing skills. So there are 3 stages of writing talked about in your text. The first is scribbling, and this is when children are just exploring with the tools. They're using markers or crayons or other writing tools to see what happens when they put it on paper. Their little marks and squiggles look like scribbles, but these are the beginning of their writing. Now, the second one is scribbling, writing, and letter-like form. So in this stage, their scribbling morphs into what's more like marks. A recognizable letter may emerge from the rows of little marks. They're kind of what are referred to as mock letters because they resemble real letters, but they may not be intentional or exact. Typically, the first letter of a child's name is the first letter that he or she will write. And initially, they'll write all those first letters in capitals because it's easier for them. I would encourage you, when you're working with children, to learn to write their name, that you write it in the text that you want it. So capital letters and small letters when they're really trying to learn to write it. Then the last stage are letters that represent sounds and words. And so by the end of preschool, they're generally starting to organize the letters that they write. Instead of just randomly writing letters on paper, they're starting to write letters in row. Sometimes they'll write row after row of the same letter, or they'll write row after row of their name. All of this, though, should happen when that child is developmentally ready and is showing an interest to do so. This shouldn't be something that we insist upon the child. We should follow their cue and remember, as I've said before, that all children develop at their own pace. Some things that you can do to be a supporter of children's writing is to be a writing role model. Let children observe you while you're writing, whether you're filling out a form or writing a newsletter. I talked earlier about experience charts, and so if you're putting a question out on chart paper and then you're writing every child's name and their response, they're getting to see you model that writing. And then making sure that you give children practice developing the fine motor skills they need for writing. It's not easy to learn to hold a pencil. There's many things that they need to be able to do before they can get to that. And so some of the things that you might be able to do is having them tear paper or having practice with small pieces of chalk. Encourage them to write on vertical surfaces such as easels or dry erase boards or chalkboards. Things that will encourage those small muscles that they need to be able to have the grasp appropriate for holding a pencil, which is called the tripod grasp. And so you want them to practice all those muscles to get prepared for that. Some other ways that you can support their writing is by providing appropriate experiences and materials for them to use throughout the classroom that encourages them to write. Earlier I talked about having books in areas of the room other than just the library. Well, we know that you need to have a writing area, but it's also important to have materials that they can write with throughout the classroom so that wherever they are, if they feel the need to write or practice writing, they can do so. And so throughout those learning centers and throughout the materials and activities that you're providing in the classroom, you're being a supporter of their writing. As you're partnering with the families in building a child's communication skills in their language and literacy skills. It's really important that we help families learn how important it is for them to communicate with their child on a daily basis, have a conversation, read to their children, provide printed materials, whether it's books or newspapers or catalogs, that they provide an environment in their own home that is literacy rich. Um, the joys of singing and rhyming with their children and joining in their pretend play, and how important it can be to sit down and have that mealtime conversation as just a few of the ways that they can really support their child's development of communication and literacy language skills.